Welcome to Unrestrained, the podcast series from CPI. Here you can enjoy conversations where professionals on all sides of crisis and behavior management relax and open up about themselves, their workplace, and their clients. You'll get the latest tips and trends from the best in the business, so tune in often to integrate their experiences with your own. Hello and welcome to Unrestrained, the CPI podcast series. This is your host, Terry Vittone, and today my guest is Mr. Jeff Holland of the Montana Department of Corrections. Hello and welcome, Jeff.
Hello, Terry.
Let me tell you a little more about my guest. Jeff Holland is a Quality Assurance Manager for the Montana Department of Corrections Youth Services Division at Pine Hills Youth Correctional Facility. Jeff worked his way up through the ranks and has more than 20 years of experience in the juvenile corrections field. His experience in juvenile corrections includes counseling, case management, occupational health and safety, staff development and training, security practices, emergency response, program development, and operations management. In addition to the other duties, Jeff is the Facility Performance-Based Standard Site Coordinator and PREA Compliance Manager. PREA stands for the Prison Rape Elimination Act. He is a Department of Justice Certified PREA Auditor, an Adjunct Instructor with the Montana Law Enforcement Academy, and a 2012 recipient of the Governor's Award for Excellence. All right, then, Jeff, let's begin. Could we begin by have you tell our listeners about the Pine Hills facility, its age, the size and characteristics of the population, the main reasons that youth come to be at Pine Hills, and some size and characteristics stats about the staff?
Sure. Pine Hills was established in 1884 as a territorial women's reformatory in the state of Montana. In around 1893, the reformatory was transitioned to the Montana State Industrial School, which served both juvenile boys and girls, until around 1921, when the last girl was transitioned to a different facility. And then since that time, our facility has undergone a number of name changes, but it's remained serving youthful inmate male offenders. At present, Pine Hills is a 120-bed facility. It serves male youth and young adults adjudicated or convicted by Montana courts. Young adults from the age of 18 to 25 are participating in a program designed to divert them from prison, while youth that are sentenced to our facility, they can be sentenced to us between the ages of 18 and 10, and these youth enter the facility as a last stop in the juvenile criminal justice intervention process, and which usually begins with probation. On average, youth coming to us arrive at our facility having more than 2 out-of-home interventions in the community. They come to us with a variety of risks and needs, from mental health issues to substance abuse to criminogenic needs specific to their history, and are finally adjudicated to the Montana Department of Corrections for placement in our facility for their crimes, which, if they were committed by adult, would be considered felonies. And I ended up in the field of corrections somewhat by accident. It wasn't a plan, but the position was available, and it fit my education and career path. And once I got in the field, I haven't left.
So you just found yourself in that setting, really able to make a difference and to understand the facility and kind of the role that you went into play.
Definitely, it was a good fit. It was a good match, and the area I live in, Montana, is a great place to raise a family, and a lot to be said for the community we're living in. So it's good all the way around.
So what would get me into Pine Hills would have to amount to you said a felony level offense then, huh? So you would have everything from substance distribution to larceny to, what other kinds of things bring young people into your facility?
Well, everything that you've mentioned, including murder, and aggravated assault, arson, are some of the more extreme crimes against person and property that we see on occasion. We do have a special housing unit and program for sex offenders, adjudicated sex offenders, youthful offenders.
So you're dealing with 120 beds. That's a lot of youths to be looking after. I imagine that the logistics have got to be a challenge sometimes.
It very much can be. We have only about 70 residents on campus right now, but it's a constant balancing act now that we have both young adult and juvenile offenders in the facility to handle those programmatic needs of both sets of populations.
All right. Well, with such a challenging population, I'd kind of like to bring CPI in here a little bit, if I could, since that's been a part of the success at Pine Hills. Could you tell our listeners a real-life example where CPI de-escalation techniques help to prevent the use of restraint or seclusion?
Yeah, I could. Matter of fact, that's a really good question, but it is a little bit difficult to answer because the concepts of care, welfare, and safety are so ingrained into everything we do with our residents at Pine Hills. It's difficult to pick just one event.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we really expect our direct care staff to know our residents well and to establish a positive rapport with them that can be drawn upon when the residents have difficulty or are having a bad day. Because once they've developed that positive rapport and they know those residents well, our staff are better able to detect and respond early to situation which could, if left alone, escalate with undesirable consequences. So in that regard, it's really difficult to pick just one example.
It would be great if you had just people really relate to the real life sort of examples, and I know it's I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have a story?
Yeah, I can think of an example. It's probably not the most dramatic that you might come up with, but
that's okay.
An event that stands out involves a young resident who came to us with a very extensive history. He had a history of failed community interventions, several of them, significant history of mental health issues, self-harm, violent behavior, aggressive, very assaultive. He was the kind of resident who simply by his presence could raise the tension level in the housing unit with both the peers and staff. In this particular case, the resident had become focused on another resident in response to a perceived slight. Staff didn't hear what was said initially, but they noted changes in that youth's behavior, changes to his body language, like he was pacing the floor, changes to his physical stance. They recognized very quickly that this youth was in the early stages of escalation, and a staff member pulled the youth aside, spent some time speaking with him, and was able to address the situation, to calm the resident, and quickly return him back to the regular programming activity. Because the staff took those preemptive actions rather than reactive, they were able to intervene before the resident got himself worked up to a point where he was beyond rational discourse and before there was problems. And I think that this situation, especially given this young man's history, these staff prevented something as serious as an assault or perhaps even the need to use physical control measures from occurring.
Excellent. That is, we like the hands-off approach, and it leads to my next question. If you describe how, I know that we talked about this in our pre-interview, how Pine Hills' focus has changed from the physical elements of the CPI program to its verbal de-escalation skills, and really you talked to me about a culture shift that happened there. Could you talk about how you achieved that?
Yeah. Well, it was a process which we recognized in early 2010, or began in early 2010, after the facility completed audit with the American Corrections Association. For many years prior to that, we'd been involved with ACA, and we'd always done very well on our audits. And this audit in particular, in the post-audit debriefing, a very experienced audit team awarded the facility a 100% rating before they even walked out the door. And of course, we were very pleased, but we also recognized that in spite of this rating, in our opinion, we were having too many instances requiring the use of physical control measures to resolve aggressive and violent resident behavior. And as a result, we were incurring injuries to staff. And in addition to that, the relationship between our residents and our staff was under some tension. And when those youth were acting out and getting into trouble, we had another situation which related to the use of sanctions, such as confinement to control resident misconduct. And this was keeping residents who were acting out from full participation in the general population programming opportunities that are available in this situation. We wanted to address these concerns and began searching for ways that we could positively affect the outcomes in these and other areas. So we did several things to affect some changes to our culture. The first thing that we did is we made a very sincere commitment to change, and that was supported from the administration all the way through our staff. We spent a great deal of time working with all levels of staff to create a true sense of staff buy-in. We adopted the use of performance-based standards at the facility to better assess our ongoing programmatic effectiveness of the operation and the safety of both residents and staff. We made some policy and procedural change related to discipline handling and confinement, and began incorporating additional opportunities within our program, including vocational and other opportunities for residents beyond just high school education and classroom education. And to support that effort, we trained or added enhanced training for staff in several areas, such as trauma-informed care, child development, verbal intervention, and de-escalation skills. And although we had much of this training in place prior to 2010, we really enhanced and focused our effort on nonviolent crisis intervention and enhanced verbal intervention, because we'd never truly fully realized its potential.
Why do you think that is?
Well, we weren't having a lot of luck transitioning those materials from a classroom into application in the day room.
I see, and just because your officers, your correction officers were so used to going to physical intervention as a first step?
Well, maybe not as a first step. I mean, that was never part of our process, but in my opinion, perhaps a little too quickly at times. Really not taking the mindset that, time is truly on our side, and any amount of time that we take, as much time as we need to take, if we're able to successfully resolve a situation without having to resort to the use of physical control measures, that is a victory, regardless of the impact on our schedule.
Mm-hmm. So at what point does the light go on, and do you get this emphasis on verbal escalation, as you said, from the classroom to the day room? Would you say, was it gradual? I mean, how did you guys start to track this and notice that it was happening?
Well, what we needed to do is we really needed to build in support beyond the classroom, and we built that in several ways. We changed some policies and procedures in order to support this intervention and this cultural change, but what we also did with NVCI training in particular is I got a 6-person crew together. 6 people were certified in NVCI. 2 people out of that group were certified in enhanced verbal intervention. And what we did is we got those people out of the classroom after running all the staff through the initial training again, and had them involved in the day-to-day interaction with the staff. If there was an event that occurred in the housing unit, odds were that one of these staff members was going to be on. They had the opportunity to meet with these staff immediately following the event to do an initial debriefing. They conducted after-action reviews. They were there to support staff and catch them doing something well and right, and give them a pat on the back. If there was a concern, they were there within just a few hours to provide counseling and guidance in the proper use of techniques in the future. We regularly refreshed on various segments of the program, at least monthly. There were some spot checks in the units by this crew. So there was a lot of training done and support done by the NVCI and enhanced verbal instructors in the units outside of classroom to ensure that staff were appropriately utilizing and implementing these skills when they were needed.
So you had this expertise in the room to provide a support structure and a reward structure for honing these verbal de-escalation skills on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
What a great strategy to make sure that takes root. I mean, to bring in that supportive supervisory role. Not that the supervisor, sometimes we sit up a little straighter when we hear that word, but in this sense, really someone there to help you accomplish something positive that you want to do.
Exactly, and it was very important to us to get out of the old paradigm that we had in place, which was, if there was a problem, we would address it. By getting these people involved in the way that I described, we were able to support movement in the direction we wanted in a positive sense rather than responding to a problem. So from a staff perspective, it didn't appear that we're out to get you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a problem now. Oh, we caught you doing something wrong, and now you're being counseled, or now you're being disciplined.
And now it's our turn.
It was a much more positive way to motivate change in that regard, and you know, it really increased staff buy-in, and most importantly, I think it truly demonstrated our commitment to these practices and to the changes that we've made in policy and procedure. It showed that we were truly supporting that.
And your population
important.
has to feel that culture change in a really visceral way. In other words, you know, I'm not going to be attacked here. If I'm acting out a little bit, I'm going to be redirected and have an option presented to me, but rather than a physical intervention. I mean, that's got to give a lot of breathing space to people who probably really want to change and are taking a hard look at where they are.
Well, it does, and because that, it's hard to develop a good rapport, a staff-resident rapport, when you're engaging in uses of force on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not doing that, and you do have that strong rapport, you've got another tool to work with when it comes down to managing youth behavior and ensuring that they're behaviorally compliant so that they can participate in all the various programmatic offerings within your facility.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, because if they're not involved in those programs and in those opportunities, if they are behaviorally non-compliant and dangerous and perhaps sanctioned or confined, and they're not in those programs, really you've got to ask yourself, what good are you doing with that resident at that moment? What benefit are they getting? And, you know, the simple answer is you know, 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor.
Mm-hmm.
Some youth in confinement is not preparing them to successfully transition from your facility back into the community.
So rather than maybe in adult corrections where there is truly a punitive element to a sentence, this is not about that. This is about, you know, changing the life course of a resident.
Mm-hmm.
Well, excellent. That's is a powerful example, I think, of embracing the CPI model, and especially with the rigor and the dedication that you guys put towards it in the day room. And transition to my next question here about, I know you guys keep some stats. Could you talk about some of the positive outcomes associated with CPI training?
Sure. Pine Hills has about 110 employees on average. Prior to this training initiative that we've discussed and some of the other things that we've implemented, the average annual workers' compensation claim rate for our facility, based on the 3 preceding years, so it's, you know, running average of those 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
was about 73 workers' comp claims per year.
Okay.
And, you know, then we moved forward. We became involved in PBS, made those changes to policy and practice.
Jeff, what year was that when you had 73 per year?
2008, 9, and 10.
Okay.
You know, that was our running average for those 3 years. And, you know, then we went ahead and made those changes to become more focused on our performance and got in performance-based standards, the policies, and really enhanced our focus on trauma-informed care, NVCI, and enhanced verbal intervention. And in the first year following that training initiative, our workers' compensation claim rate dropped to 13 claims, 8 of which were $0 claims.
It's remarkable.
And in terms of financial liability, that for that 3-year average, our average liability was over $250,000 a year. And in that first year after the training initiative, our maximum estimated liability was $20,000.
So quite a dramatic reduction.
Yeah, what we're looking at there was roughly an 82% reduction in injury claims rate and nearly $250,000 decrease in liability. And the really great news is that in years since then, we've been able to sustain these lower claim rates.
So it wasn't just a statistical or like this focus for this 3-year period and then sort of backsliding. It has sustained in your facility.
Yes.
Can I ask you, Jeff, with these successes you've described, I mean, thinking about Pine Hills, what are some of the greatest challenges that you face going forward?
Well, the greatest challenge, in my opinion, is to fight against that tendency, I think that institutions and sometimes people have toward complacency, to get into that, aha, we've made it moment, and rest on your success when there's always new challenges before us. We want to keep making improvements beyond the achievements of the past, and we want to always be seeking new and better ways to meet our facility mission to habilitate residents so that they can successfully return to communities and become a productive member of that community rather than becoming entrenched in the criminal justice system.
And what about the staff and facility at Pine Hills gives you the greatest cause for pride or a sense of accomplishment?
Well, working in corrections is not a career path where you're going to constantly get that feel-good moment. You really need to find an intrinsic reward for your efforts, because your successes leave the facility, they integrate back into society, and you never see them again. What you do see is those few that return, and when you see that continually over the years, it can make a person question whether they've been successful in making any difference at all. But when I first started in correction years ago, there was a gentleman who told me corrections is family business. And now that I've been in the field for a number of years, I've gotten to the point now where I occasionally see youth who arrive at the facility who are children of former residents that maybe even I had on my caseload at one time. And I think I have a little bit of a better understanding of what that gentleman meant. So for me, the greatest sense of accomplishment comes from recognizing the generational impact that our actions as individuals and as a facility can have on the residents and the community. Because when we positively affect the life of a resident, we're not just affecting his life. There's a generational impact where these positive outcomes carry forward into the future for him, his family, for the town or community in which he lives, for the state, and perhaps the society as a whole.
So, in other words, you're seeing less of that generational recidivism than you were at one time, or feeling the change that in this generational process of going forward, that it truly is influencing the culture in a positive way, family by family, if you will.
Well, that's certainly the hope. I mean, and knowing and having seen a few examples of young men who've left the facility and become successful. Just this last spring, I got an invitation from a gentleman who was on my caseload quite a number of years ago, who graduated his undergraduate work and now is completing his master's in engineering. And it's those little moments that really let you know that perhaps your efforts have borne fruit.
Are you have any last thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
By implementing NBCI and verbal de-escalation skills and supporting it properly, you're really showing your staff and your residents how much you value their safety.
That's great.
Because, go ahead.
No. Finish your thought. It's really important.
It's really communicating that the schedule is not as important as they are as an individual, because it's so easy for us within this field to get stuck on that we've got to move people from point A to point B, or we have this coming up next on the schedule. If you implement these tools properly, you really are taking the time necessary to resolve situations in a means and a manner that keeps people safe. And that is success.
And that is a great closing thought for today, Jeff. My guest today has been Jeff Holland. He's a Quality Assurance Manager for the Montana Department of Corrections Youth Services Division at Pine Hills Youth Correctional Facility. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining us today on Unrestrained. Tune in again soon for another interview with an expert in behavior management. Until then, this is your host, Terry Vittone, hoping your intention is prevention.